Welcome to the 5-Minute Salute. I'm your host, Chris Budihas, and joining me virtually is Kevin Landtroop with SBIR Advisors. Kevin, how are you?
I'm great, Chris. Good to see you, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. So, I appreciate you coming on the show. It's funny. So, let's talk about where you're from and what you do in the military.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'm in Texas now. I grew up in Texas from Corpus Christi. Never really left the state until I got recruited to play golf at West Point back in 1994. 98 was commissioned as an armored cavalry officer. It's been 4 years. As a traditional stuff, platoon leader XO, went to Bosnia, went to Egypt for a bit. And then I went to law school, which was a little bit of a non-traditional pathway. Spent 3 years in law school at the University of Texas here in Austin. And then I went and practiced law in the military for 13 years. I think you and I probably came across each other on the Marne Division staff for a few minutes.
Yeah.
Did all of the normal things that you would expect a military lawyer to do. Prosecuted, defended, brigade lawyer, division staff, deployed to Iraq for a lot longer than I probably would have wanted to. Also had an interesting almost 2.5 years at the National Training Center as the legal trainer there, which was a lot of fun. And then I finished up in 2018 and came here.
That's awesome. So let's talk about this animal called the SBIR and what are you doing with SBIR Advisors? So tell us about that journey from being in the military to what you're doing now with SBIR Advisors.
Yeah, well, the SBIR, and so the name of our company is SBIR, SBIR Advisors, which SBIR stands for Small Business Innovation Research, which is a science and technology program that's U.S. government-wide that sets aside a portion of the R&D budget for various agencies for specific projects with small businesses. And there are some rules surrounding the program, but the program is interesting because as the DoD in particular has been interested over the last 6 or 7 years in connecting with a different type of technology provider. A lot of folks in the military may not even be aware that there's this entire sort of industry of companies that are venture-backed or venture capital-backed startups. And most of them are working on emerging technology solutions like artificial intelligence, augmented virtual reality, autonomy, drones, all kinds of things like that. There's a ton of software and cybersecurity. But those startups traditionally don't do business with the DoD or with the government in general because they're too slow. The SBIR program, however, is a pot of money that's government-wide, nearly $4 billion annually, that's not specifically appropriated for any one thing. It's pushed down to the research labs, and they can spend it on their priorities. And so that type of program is very accessible for startups who want to move fast. They want to try to book revenue relatively quickly. They want to adapt their technology to their customer's problem and see if it fits, and then see if there's a market in there. And so that's what our business does. When I left the military, I didn't really know much of what I wanted to do, except that I didn't want to practice law anymore. And I was going to come back to Texas because this is where my family and my network and everything was. And so I got back here in the spring of 2018 and found that in downtown Austin, Texas, there was this place called the Capitol Factory. And inside the Capitol Factory, there were all of these military organizations that were looking for tech startups. Defense Innovation Unit at the time was called DIUX, was the first one. And then afterwards, the Air Force's Innovation Cell, AFWorks. And then in July, as you are probably aware of 2018, the Army announced that they were going to activate Army Futures Command and the Army Applications Lab here in downtown Austin, Texas. And that created all of this energy and this interest by all this community of startups. And so what we did was we started helping those startup companies understand, the DoD is a massive monster, but within that massive monster, there are problems. There's problems in communications and data and navigation and all kinds of things like that. And so we would help these companies understand what problems they could solve with their technology, how those problems present to military users in their training environments or in their operational environments, and how the military does business, specifically using the SBIR program. We started with an academy that was just basically a 4-day workshop, if you will, to get these companies started. And then that morphed into a service, an advisory service that became SBIR Advisors. We founded SBIR Advisors in October 2020. And now in May of 2024, we have 46 employees, 170 companies that we're representing. And our companies have won across the portfolio around $500 million in DoD technology contracts.
That's huge. Yeah. Do you guys still do the 4-day training program, or are you just kind of solely working with companies, or both?
Yeah, so my personal kind of like entrepreneurship journey, I started a nonprofit that did this defense academy, and I was doing it at Capital Factory through a veteran organization called Bunker Labs. And then when Capital Factory figured out that they needed to understand how to deal with all of these defense customers that they had in their building, in their facility, that program, Defense Academy, became a Capital Factory program, and I became a Capital Factory employee for almost 2 years. And so that program still runs through Capital Factory, and yes, we still run it, but as partners to Capital Factory, if that makes sense.
No, I can see the growth industry, and for those in the audience, as they listen to us, I mean, I'd say the last 20 years, or longer, we had these big organizations like Boeing, General Dynamics, and such. But as you'd mentioned, the speed of technology is going so quickly these days. You got these small startups. In some cases, as I've seen with some of the autonomy and AI stuff that's occurring in this space, the civilian market moves much quicker. A lot of that because of the capitalism aspect of it. But the ability for our Department of Defense to harness that talent and kind of pull that over is gigantic. And it seems like you guys just basically, hey, let's help you navigate that space between, where Department of Defense is and where they need solutions to get in there, especially with some of these companies that have no defense experience. So I can imagine the value proposition for them is pretty large in many cases. So what kind of companies are you specifically looking at? What's like the best partners? Is it small, the medium, or kind of in between?
Yeah, so our typical company, and this doesn't represent all of them, but the vast majority of them meet most of these characteristics. They're all working in emerging technology. So those technology areas that you just mentioned, they're typically going to be commercially focused. And so yes, they have very little experience in the DoD. Maybe they've submitted a SBIR Phase 1 proposal. Maybe they've won a SBIR Phase 1 proposal, but they're not really organized to do business with the DoD. And then the third component is most of them they're startups. They're venture backed. In startup language, you talk about funding in series, and that like a seed round is a very early stage. You're using that money to develop your first product. A Series A, you're using that money to take that product to your first customers. And then Series B, C, D, or larger funding rounds to help scale the company. Our companies are typically going to be somewhere between seed and C, usually more than 5 million raised. Sometimes we'll make an exception for an earlier stage company if they have a really interesting technology.
That's great. And so for the audience, Kevin, how can folks find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. We have a website, SBIRadvisors.com, although our website really is not the entry funnel for us. The vast majority of the new companies that I meet, and it's well more than 100 a year, probably do between 200 and 300 new company interviews or discussions like this in the course of a year. But the vast majority of them come from VC partners, startup accelerators, places like the Capital Factory that we're good friends with, and existing or former clients.
No, hey, appreciate that. Hey, folks out there, so take a look at the SBIR Advisors. Look at Kevin Landtroop. He's over there on LinkedIn. And if you like what you hear, it's a very interesting conversation for a lot of our companies out there who are in this space to advance technologies, both in the civilian and defense realm. Take a look at what they're doing at SBIR Advisors. And hey, if you like what you hear, follow us on LinkedIn, and we'll see you at our next segment.